Have you ever wondered what would happen if the person you rejected turned out to be everything you ever wanted? This CEO husband spent 3 years telling his wife she wasn't beautiful enough to be seen with him in public, then discovered she was secretly the famous author he idolized. Today's story exposes the painful truth about judging someone's worth based on appearance. When Chen finally revealed herself as the mysterious author Myota, she didn't just stun a room full of elites. She reclaimed her power and dignity. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the red dress moment wasn't just about revenge. It was about a woman finally stepping into her true identity after years of deliberate invisibility. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, a like and a subscribe would mean the world to me. It really helps the channel grow and keeps you in the loop for all the latest content. Chen stood in the shadows of her husband's success, a woman deemed too plain to be seen beside the powerful CEO Yi Heng. Each morning followed the same painful routine. She rose before dawn to prepare an elaborate breakfast that would sit untouched as Yi Heng barely acknowledged her presence before rushing out the door to his empire. The sprawling penthouse, decorated in minimalist luxury, felt more like a prison than a home, a gilded cage where she existed as a fixture rather than a partner. "Your hair looks particularly lifeless today," Yi Heng remarked one morning, not bothering to look up from his phone as Chen set down his perfectly brewed coffee. "Make sure to do something about that before the housekeeper arrives. I don't need her thinking I married someone who doesn't care about appearances." The casual cruelty in his tone suggested this was merely routine observation, rather than an intentional wound. 3 years into their marriage, Chen had grown accustomed to such comments. They landed with precision, targeting insecurities Yi Heng had carefully cultivated since their wedding day. The irony wasn't lost on Chen, that he had chosen her, pursued her even, only to spend their marriage systematically dismantling her confidence. "The quarterly investors' dinner is next Friday," Yi Heng announced, scrolling through his calendar. "I'll need you to ensure the house is spotless for the staff I'm bringing in, and naturally, you'll make yourself scarce for the evening." He glanced up, his expression hardening as he added, "The last time you appeared, Liu Fenggan asked if you were new to the housekeeping staff. It was embarrassing for everyone involved." Chen nodded silently, her eyes downcast. "I'll make sure everything is perfect," she replied, her voice soft but steady. This too was routine, the systematic exclusion from every aspect of Yi Heng's public life. The company galas she was forbidden to attend, the business dinners where her chair remained empty, the photos on his desk that featured only him, as though he existed in perpetual bachelorhood, despite the gold band on his finger. The power imbalance in their marriage was stark and deliberately maintained. Yi Heng wielded his wealth and status like weapons, creating a relationship where Chen remained dependent and isolated. Their sleeping arrangements told the story clearly. Separate bedrooms on opposite ends of the penthouse, with Yi Heng explaining to visitors that his wife snored terribly, a fabrication designed to justify the distance he insisted upon maintaining. When guests did appear, Chen was introduced vaguely as household staff, or, if pressed, my wife, with a dismissive wave that discouraged further questions. She had learned to fade into the background, becoming as invisible as Yi Heng clearly wished her to be. The constant barrage of criticism had eroded her sense of self, until she sometimes caught herself wondering if perhaps she was right. Perhaps she was inherently unworthy of being seen. The psychological damage of living under such conditions ran deep. Each disparaging comment about her appearance chipped away at her self-declension. Each exclusion reinforced her isolation. Each public humiliation, like the dinner party where Yi Heng had loudly discussed plastic surgery options, while staring further into a shell of shame and inadequacy. Yet something curious happened in these moments of deepest degradation. If one watched Chen closely, they might notice the subtle squaring of her shoulders, the momentary flash of something unreadable in her eyes, before she lowered them again. These flickers of resistance were so brief that Yi Heng never noticed them, too consumed with his own reflection to recognize the quiet dignity with which his wife absorbed his cruelty. Your background makes you unsuitable for the circles I move in, Gian told her one evening, after returning from a social event. It's simply a matter of class and bearing. Some people are born to shine in society. Others, he gestured vaguely at her, clearly aren't. He sighed dramatically, as though her plainness were a burden he nobly carried. It's fortunate I don't require arm candy to succeed. My reputation stands on its own merit. While excoriating Chen's supposed inadequacies, Yi Heng failed to notice the irony of his obsession with auteur moyen, the reclusive literary sensation whose books lined his nightstand. Chen observed how reverently he handled these volumes, how he quoted passages to impressed colleagues, how he speculated endlessly about the mysterious woman behind the word. Muya understands the human condition like no other writer today, he would declare to anyone who would listen. Her insights into relationships, into power dynamics, it's as though she sees through walls. He would trace the embossed signature on the book covers with something approaching tenderness, a tenderness Chen had never experienced from his hands. In the rare moments when Yi Heng was away on business, Chen moved differently through their home. Her steps became lighter, her posture straightened, her eyes more focused. She would wander into his study, observing the collection of Mia's works with a curious expression that might have troubled Yi Heng had he witnessed it. The most revealing moments came late at night, after Yi Heng had retired to his bedroom. Chen would sit at the small desk in her room, pulling out a leather-bound journal from a locked drawer. Here, in the sanctuary of midnight silence, she wrote with surprising eloquence, her pen moving across the page with confident strokes that suggested years of practice. The words that flowed revealed a mind of remarkable perception and depth, a stark contrast to the meek woman Yi Heng believed he had married. One particular evening, after a charity gala, where Yi Heng had once again left Chen at home with the excuse that she wasn't feeling well, he returned in an unusual state of agitation. He paced the living room, glass of scotch in hand, occasionally glancing at Chen with an expression, They say Muya might make a public appearance soon, he finally said, his voice tight with excitement. After all these years of anonymity, she's finally stepping into the light. He took a long sip of his drink, eyes gleaming with something like hunger. Can you imagine meeting the mind behind those words? Being in the presence of such brilliance? Chen carefully folded the dress she had been mending. It would certainly be interesting, she replied neutrally, though sometimes mystery adds to the appeal. Once revealed, the reality rarely matches our imagination. Yi Heng dismissed her comment with a wave. You wouldn't understand the connection I feel to her work. It's as though she's speaking directly to me. He set down his glass with unexpected force. Which brings me to something I've been meaning to discuss. The shift in his tone caused Chen to look up, her hand stilling in her lap. Yi Heng stood before her, suddenly formal, a businessman about to close a difficult deal. I think we both know this arrangement isn't working, he said flatly. It was a mistake from the beginning. I need someone who complements my position, someone who can stand beside me without embarrassment. You, he gestured vaguely at her entire being, are clearly not that person. Chen sat motionless, watching him with those quiet eyes that never quite revealed her thoughts. I want a divorce, Yi Heng continued, gaining confidence from her silence. I deserve someone worthy of my status, someone who understands my world. A slight smile touched his lips as he added, someone like Muya, perhaps. The delusion in his statement might have been comical, if not for its cruelty. Yi Heng truly believed himself deserving of brilliance, while actively crushing it beneath his heel, daily. I've instructed my lawyer to draw up the papers, he continued, already mentally moving past their marriage. You'll be compensated fairly, of course. I'm not unreasonable. The generosity in his voice suggested he expected gratitude for this concession. Chen remained silent for a long moment, her face impassive. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an unusual quality that momentarily caught Yi Heng off guard. Very well, she said simply, "if that's what you want." Something in her calm acceptance seemed to irritate Yi Hang, who perhaps had expected tears or protests. Instead, he found himself facing a woman who appeared almost relieved by his decision to end their marriage. The literary world buzzed with speculation about author Mia, a phantom who penned soul-stirring prose while remaining completely hidden from public view. Yi Hang, like thousands of others, collected every interview and book-signing transcript, searching for clues to her identity, never suspecting that the greatest clue might be sitting across his breakfast table each morning. Muya had emerged 3 years ago, her debut novel climbing bestseller lists with astonishing speed. Despite her meteoric rise to literary stardom, she remained a complete mystery. No photographs, no public appearances, only written interviews carefully managed through her publisher. The nation was captivated, not just by her words, but by the enigma she had constructed around herself. In Yi Hang's executive office, a special bookshelf displayed Muya's complete collection, 5 novels and 2 essay collections, their spines perfectly aligned, their pages marked with color-capped tabs where passages had particularly moved him. While his wife prepared meals in their penthouse kitchen, Yi Hang would spend hours analyzing Muya's words, convinced that hidden between her lines lay clues to the author's true identity. "You simply don't understand what makes her extraordinary," Yi Hang explained to his executive assistant, who had suggested another author's work. He ran his finger along the embossed lettering of Muya's latest novel. "Her writing doesn't simply tell stories. It dissects the human condition with surgical precision. The way she exposes our hidden motivations, our secret shames. She sees through everyone." The irony that he couldn't see through his own prejudices toward his wife seemed entirely lost on him. Literary critics attributed Muya's power to her anonymity. She had become a blank canvas onto which readers projected their own ideals. Scholars compared her to other famous anonymous authors throughout history, from the mysterious Elena Ferrante to the early anonymous publications of Jane Austen. The public's fascination with creators who hide their identities often transformed their work into something larger than literature. It became mythology. At an exclusive business dinner, where Chen was predictably absent, Yi Hang engaged in animated discussion about Muya with his colleagues. The conversation had shifted from quarterly projections to literature, after one executive mentioned the upcoming National Literary Excellence Gala, where rumors suggested Muya might finally make an appearance. "She must be as beautiful as her words," Yi Hang declared, swirling expensive whiskey in his glass. His colleagues nodded in agreement. "A mind that brilliant, that sensitive to nuance, she couldn't possibly be ordinary." "Perhaps she's hideously disfigured," suggested one of the marketing directors, "and that's why she hides." Yi Hang dismissed this with a wave. "Impossible. Someone who understands beauty with such depth could not be without it herself. Her descriptions of human connection are too intimate, too knowing." The conversation revealed the shallow foundations upon which Yi Hang had built his worldview. Beauty and worth were inextricably linked in his mind, each reinforcing the other in a closed loop of superficial judgment. His fixation on Muya had transformed over months from literary appreciation to something more obsessive. He had begun to imagine meeting her, connecting with her, being recognized by her as a kindred spirit who truly understood her work. The rumors about Muya's identity had reached mythical proportions. Some believed she was the daughter of a disgraced politician, writing under a pseudonym to escape her family's shadow. Others whispered she was a celebrated academic whose controversial views forced her into anonymity. The most romantic theory, which Yi Hang secretly favored, suggested she was a woman of exceptional beauty and intelligence who had retreated from society after some profound personal tragedy. What all these theories shared was the assumption that Muya must be extraordinary in every way, not just in her mind, but in her circumstances, her appearance, her very essence. The possibility that greatness might reside in someone ordinary, someone overlooked, never entered the public imagination, nor Yi Hang's assistant entered his office one afternoon with an envelope bearing the embossed logo of the National Literary Association. "It arrived by special courier, sir," she said, placing it carefully on his desk. Inside was an exclusive invitation to the year's most prestigious literary event, the Excellence in Literature Gala. A handwritten note from the chairperson mentioned the possible attendance of our most elusive honoree, and extended the invitation to Yi Hang based on his substantial donations to the association's literacy programs. Yi Hang stared at the invitation, his heart racing. After years of following Muya's work, analyzing her interviews, and collecting every word attributed to her, he might finally have the chance to see her in person. In his mind, this moment transcended mere literary appreciation. It felt like destiny. That evening, he returned to the penthouse with unusual energy. Chen had prepared dinner as always, the table set with quiet precision. She moved through the space with practiced invisibility, a skill honed through years of being treated as furniture rather than a person. "I won't be needing dinner," Yihang announced, loosening his tie. "I've had a significant development today." Chen paused, a serving dish in her hands. "Would you like me to put it away for later?" "But it won't be necessary." He pulled the invitation from his jacket pocket, holding it like a precious artifact. "I've been invited to the Literary Excellence Gala. Muya will be there." A momentary stillness came over Chen's features. So brief, it was imperceptible to someone who never truly looked at her. "That sounds important to you," she said quietly. "It's more than important. It's—" Yihang searched for the right word. "Transformative. Meeting her will change everything." Chen returned to the kitchen, placing the untouched food on the counter. "You've spoken of her work often. I understand why you'd want to meet her." Yihang barely registered her words, already mentally preparing for the encounter. He imagined Muye, elegant, sophisticated, her eyes reflecting the depth displayed in her prose. He pictured introducing himself, explaining how deeply he understood her work, watching recognition dawn in her eyes, as she realized he was not like other readers. "I think it's time we discussed something," Yihang said, following Chen into the kitchen. "Our situation." Chen turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Our situation? Our marriage?" The word sounded foreign on his lips, as though he rarely acknowledged its existence. "I believe we both know it isn't working. It never has." Chen remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've had the divorce papers prepared for some time." He spoke clinically, as if discussing a minor business transaction. "I think we should proceed with finalizing them. You'll be compensated fairly. I'm not unreasonable. May I ask why now?" Chen's voice remained steady. "I've been reflecting on what I truly want in life, what I deserve." Yihang straightened his shoulders. "I need to pursue my destiny with someone worthy of my position, someone who complements me intellectually and socially." The implication hung in the air. Someone like Muya, the idealized figure who had captured his imagination, while the real woman before him had been systematically erased from his consciousness. His obsession with the phantom author had become the justification for discarding his marriage, a psychological dynamic where the idealized figure was prioritized over the real relationship. "I see," Chen said after a moment. She folded her hands before her. "Would you allow me 1 month before signing the papers to arrange my affair?" Her calm acceptance seemed to irritate Yihang, who perhaps had expected resistance that would validate his decision. Instead, he found himself facing a woman who appeared almost relieved. "Fine. 1 month." He placed the invitation back in his pocket. "I'll have my lawyer contact you with the details." As Yihang slipped the invitation back into his pocket, something unspoken hung in the air between them. What Chen had agreed to, with such unsettling calm, wasn't merely a divorce. It was freedom from a meticulously documented nightmare. Each night after enduring another day of humiliation, Chen retreated to her private corner of their sprawling penthouse and opened a leather-bound notebook, recording the day's events with the detached precision of a scientist studying a particularly toxic specimen. The public spectacle of their marriage had evolved into a ritual of humiliation that extended far beyond the walls of their home. Yihang's mother, Madame Lin, a woman whose elegance was matched only by her cruelty, had made it her personal mission to remind Qian of her inadequacy at every possible opportunity. During last month's family dinner, she had circled Qian like a predator, wineglass dangling from manicured fingers. "I've always wondered," Madame Lin had said loudly enough for the entire table to hear, "what possessed my son to marry someone so ordinary? Was it some kind of charity project?" Yihang, her laughter rang like crystal breaking as Chen silently distributed plated desserts, her hand steady despite the verbal assault. Yihim hadn't defended her. Instead, he'd smiled indulgently at his mother and replied, "Sometimes I wonder the same thing." before launching into a discussion about his latest acquisition, a rare first edition of Muya's debut novel. The memory of that night occupied 3 full pages in Chen's notebook, including verbatim quotes and observations about how Yi Hong's shoulders had relaxed when attention shifted away from his embarrassing wife. What appeared as submission to others was in reality something far more calculated, every slight captured in ink, as if preserving evidence for a future reckoning. At corporate gatherings, Chen became simultaneously invisible and the center of attention, a paradox only possible when people speak about someone as if they aren't present. During the chairman's retirement party, she had stood in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, forgotten until needed, yet overhearing everything. "Your wife is so devoted," Li Wei Yihan Chief's chief financial officer had remarked with barely concealed disdain. "Like a shadow that knows its place. How did you train her so well?" The men had laughed, crystal tumblers of whiskey catching the light as they toasted their own cleverness. "Some women understand their limitations," Yi Hong had replied, his voice carrying perfectly to where Chen stood frozen. "She knows she couldn't possibly contribute anything meaningful to our conversations." The social ostracism was no accident, but rather a carefully orchestrated campaign. In closed, wealthy communities like theirs, exclusion functioned as both entertainment and reinforcement of hierarchies. The psychological impact of such treatment typically manifested as diminished self-worth, withdrawal, and eventually complete submission to the dominant narrative. A process Yi Hong seemed to count on. Perhaps the most painful ritual was what Chen privately called the exhibition in her notebook. Moments when Yi Hong would suddenly invite her to join conversations for the specific purpose of highlighting her inadequacy. During a business dinner with potential investors, he had beckoned her over with a casual wave. "Tell Mr. Zhang about your family's shop," he'd instructed, his tone deceptively light. "He's interested in how different our backgrounds are." Chen had known exactly what was expected. A performance of humility that would amuse his guests while reinforcing her unworthiness. She had spoken quietly about her parents' small bookstore in a provincial town, the struggle to keep it open during economic downturns, the hours spent dusting volumes that rarely sold. "Imagine that," Yi Hong had interrupted, placing his hand on her shoulder in a gesture that appeared affectionate but felt like a restraint. From dusty shelves of forgotten books to the wife of Hang Industries' CEO. A true Cinderella story, wouldn't you say? The investors had laughed, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge their host. Chen had been dismissed with a slight nod, returning to the kitchen where she belonged. Later she had documented not just his words, but the slight pressure of his fingers against her collarbone. A warning disguised as affection. Rumors flourished in the vacuum of information about their unusual marriage. Some whispered that Yi Hong had married Chen to fulfill the conditions of an inheritance. Others suggested a more sordid arrangement, that she possessed some compromising information that forced his hand. The most popular theory, however, was that he had married her out of pity after her family's business collapsed. A temporary arrangement that had inexplicably lasted 3 years. What none of them knew was that Qian recorded every speculative whisper, every sideways glance, every hesitation when she was introduced. Her notebook contained maps of social connections, detailing who originated which rumor and how it transformed as it spread. She noted linguistic patterns, how Yi Hong's wife was always spoken with a slight downward inflection, dismissing her before she'd even been fully acknowledged. After particularly brutal social gatherings, Chen would retreat to the small study Yi Hong never entered, claiming it was too cramped for his taste. There, surrounded by books he considered beneath his intellectual caliber, she would sit at a simple desk and transcribe the evening's events. Her handwriting never betrayed emotion, no press pen marks during painful recollections, no teardrops warping the paper. Instead, her documentation possessed an almost clinical detachment, as if she were recording the behavior of specimens in a laboratory rather than people who had systematically dismantled her dignity. One night, after a particularly vicious dinner party where Yi Hang had encouraged guests to compare Chen favorably with the mysterious Moya, one woman hides behind anonymity, despite her brilliance, while another should perhaps consider it due to her lack thereof. She had added something new to her ritual. After completing her documentation, she had opened a laptop hidden beneath a false bottom in her desk drawer. The screen illuminated her face as her fingers flew across the keyboard, transforming raw observations into something more refined, more powerful. The work continued until dawn, when she carefully stored everything away before preparing Yi Hang's breakfast. If he noticed the shadows beneath her eyes, he never mentioned them. Her appearance was of interest to him only when it could be criticized. 2 weeks after handing Chen the divorce papers, Yi Hang burst into the apartment with uncharacteristic energy, brandishing an elegant envelope like a trophy. "The Literary Excellence Gala," he announced without preamble. Muyaye is rumored to be accepting an award in person. His eyes shone with an almost religious fervor as he described the exclusive event. "They're saying this might be the night she finally reveals herself to the world," he continued, already mentally placing himself at the center of this momentous occasion. "After 3 years of mystery, we'll see the face behind the words that have captivated the nation." Chen had nodded politely, offering appropriate congratulations on securing an invitation to such a prestigious event. "Of course," Yi Hang added, his tone shifting to the dismissive one he reserved exclusively for her. "You won't be attending. This is a sophisticated gathering of literary minds and influential people." He straightened his tie, avoiding her gaze. "Besides, the divorce will be finalized soon. No need to pretend anymore." What Yi Hang failed to notice, as he swept past her, was the slight curve of Chen's lips. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. Had he been more observant, he might have wondered about the quiet confidence emanating from the woman he had spent 3 years attempting to diminish. He might have questioned why someone facing divorce and public humiliation could appear so composed, so certain of something he couldn't begin to comprehend. That night, as Yi Hang slept soundly in his separate bedroom, Chen added one final entry to her leather-bound notebook before closing it with a sense of completion. Then she reached for her laptop and began typing a speech, one that would be delivered at the very gala Yi Hang was so eager to attend. The words flowed effortlessly, born from years of careful observation and silent endurance. Failed another to recognize. The moment Yi Hang's car disappeared down the driveway each morning, a metamorphosis occurred behind the cold marble walls of the penthouse. The timid, plain-faced woman who had served breakfast with downcast eyes vanished, replaced by someone entirely different, someone with purpose, confidence, and undeniable talent. For 3 years, Chen had perfected this daily transformation, a carefully orchestrated deception that required meticulous planning and unwavering discipline. She always waited exactly 17 minutes after Yi Hang's departure, enough time to ensure he wouldn't return for a forgotten document or phone. Then, with practiced efficiency, Chen made her way to the rarely used eastern wing of the penthouse, to a room Yi Hang had dismissed as storage, without ever questioning its contents. The door opened with a soft click of the key she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her closet. Inside, sunshine streamed through windows she had personally cleaned each week, illuminating what could only be described as the workshop of a master. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled not with decorative volumes chosen for their leather bindings or color coordination, but with dog-eared reference materials, literary journals, and notebooks filled with handwritten observation. A sleek computer occupied the center of an antique writing desk, a deliberate contrast that seemed to embody Chen herself, modern brilliance, housed in what appeared to be an unassuming exterior. "Good morning, Muya," she whispered to herself, as she settled into the worn leather chair, a small ritual that helped her transition between identities. Within minutes, her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision, continuing exactly where she had left off the previous day. The manuscript, her 6th novel, was nearing completion with a deadline looming just 2 weeks away. Chen's process, as Mia, bore no resemblance to the hesitant, apologetic manner she adopted around Yihang. Here she wrote with authority and conviction, occasionally pausing to consult her notebooks, those same leather-bound journals that contained not just records of Yihang's cruelty, but the raw material for what critics called the most insightful character studies in modern literature. Literary history was filled with writers who maintained separate identities. Chen had studied them all. Marianne Evans, becoming George Eliot to escape the limitations placed on female writers. Fernando Pessoa, creating heteronyms with distinct writing styles. And more recently, Elena Ferrante guarding her privacy, while her novels achieved international acclaim. But Chen's dual existence went beyond pseudonyms or privacy concerns. Her separation of identities was total and physical, down to how she carried herself, spoke, and even thought. A notification chimed on her secure email account, the one accessible only through a VPN and known to just 3 people in the world: her editor, her literary agent, and the head of the National Literary Association. Chen's eyes widened as she read the message, her fingers momentarily frozen above the keyboard. "Dear Ms. Muya," it began, "the Board of Governors is pleased to formally request your presence at this year's Excellence in Literature Gala. As you know, your latest novel has been selected for our highest honor. While we have respected your privacy these past 3 years, we believe the significance of this award warrants an in-person acceptance. A brief appearance and short address would mean everything to your readers and the literary community that has embraced your work so completely." Chen leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a rare moment of satisfaction. This was it, the culmination of her plan, the moment she had been methodically working toward since before she ever met Yihang. She opened a hidden folder on her computer, clicking through to a document titled Research Proposal, dated 4 years earlier. The academic language outlined what had become her life, a sociological experiment, examining superficial value systems among elite business circles through immersive participation. Her marriage had never been about love or financial security. It had been research, deliberate, calculated research, for what would become her most ambitious work. She had approached her marriage to Yihang with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, documenting the subtle and not-so-subtle ways society valued appearance over substance. The flashback came unbidden. Sitting across from Yihang at that first meeting, carefully dressed in clothes that obscured her natural grace, hair deliberately styled to appear lifeless, makeup applied to dull rather than enhance her features. She had studied his reactions, noting how quickly his initial interest faded when he categorized her as plain, yet he had pursued her anyway, after discovering her family's modest bookstore had connections to rare manuscript collectors, a detail she had strategically revealed to pique his interest in her. Despite her manufactured unattractiveness, Chen closed the document and moved to her closet, not the modest collection of forgettable garments Yihang occasionally complained about, but a hidden compartment behind the storage room bookshelf. Here hung a single item, a stunning red dress, never worn, but perfectly tailored to her measurements. She had purchased it 3 months ago, anticipating this very invitation. Her fingers traced the silken fabric, feeling its potential like a tangible force. Turning to her desk, Chen opened her email and composed a brief, elegant response, accepting the invitation to appear at the gala. She signed it simply, Muya, practicing the signature several times on a notepad beside her keyboard. The flowing script looked nothing like Chen's careful, restrained handwriting, another deliberate separation between her two selves. Her phone alarm chimed softly, the warning that gave her exactly 45 minutes to return the room to its pristine, untouched appearance before Yihang's assistant would call with his daily demands. Chen saved her work, backed it up to an encrypted cloud service, and began meticulously erasing all evidence of Muya's existence from the physical space. That evening, As Yi Hung announced his plans for the gala over a dinner he barely touched, Chen maintained her practiced expression of mild interest. Inside, however, a clock was ticking down to the moment when her experiment would reach its conclusion. The invitation specifically mentioned Muya might attend, Yi Hung said, not bothering to look at Chen as he spoke. Can you imagine? After years of mystery, she might finally show her face. His expression shifted to one of dreamlike admiration. I've always believed she must be extraordinary, someone whose beauty matches her brilliant mind. Chen nodded politely, offering a soft, "How interesting," while refilling his water glass. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman Yi Hang idolized had been serving him meals and listening to his complaints for 3 years. That the mind he so admired had been documenting his every shallow judgment and cruel dismissal. I've decided, Yi Hung continued, finally looking at Chen with cold determination, that when I return from the gala, I expect you to be gone. The divorce papers are ready. It's time we both moved on to more appropriate arrangements. Of course, Chen replied with the quiet acceptance he had come to expect from her. Will there be anything else you need tonight? Yi Hung waved her away, already lost in fantasies of meeting the mysterious Muya. As Chen cleared the table, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles, not the meek expression Yi Hung was accustomed to, but something sharper, more knowing. In exactly 9 days, both Chen and Yi Hung would get exactly what they wanted, though only one of them understood what was truly happening. That small, knowing smile was just the first ripple of what would become a tidal wave of transformation. Behind every woman who has made herself small lies another version waiting to emerge at precisely the right moment. As Yi Hang's car disappeared down the driveway toward the gala, Chen faced her reflection with a singular thought. Tonight would be the last time she would ever diminish herself for someone else's comfort. She counted to 60, watching the clock with practiced patience. Then, as if shedding an ill-fitting costume, Chen's posture straightened. The hunched shoulders that made her appear smaller instantly relaxed. Her eyes, deliberately downcast in Yi Hung's presence, now lifted with sharp focus and unmistakable intelligence. The transformation had begun, not with cosmetics, but with the simple act of reclaiming her natural bearing. Chen moved to her bathroom with purpose, each step measured and confident, nothing like the hesitant shuffle Yi Hang was accustomed to seeing. She opened the medicine cabinet and removed several unmarked bottles she'd been applying daily for years. The contents weren't medications, but specially formulated cosmetics, designed to create artificial imperfections. She unscrewed the first bottle and poured its contents down the drain, watching the beige liquid disappear with satisfaction. The bathroom mirror reflected a face deliberately made unremarkable. Chen wet a cloth and began to scrub at her skin, removing the custom-tinted foundation that created artificial blemishes and discoloration. As the water in the sink turned murky, her natural complexion emerged, flawless, radiant, and utterly beautiful. Years of deliberate cosmetic sabotage washed away with each stroke of the cloth. 3 years, she whispered to her reflection, as clarity began to emerge. 3 years of making myself invisible. She reached for the severe bun at the nape of her neck, pulling out the plain pins that held it in place. Her hair cascaded down her back, not the dull, lifeless strands Yi Hang had complained about, but thick, glossy waves she had dampened and flattened each morning. She ran her fingers through it, feeling its natural bounce return after years of deliberate suppression. The process of erasing her ugly wife persona continued methodically. Chen opened the bathroom cabinet's false back panel, revealing a compartment filled with professional-grade cosmetic products she'd never allowed Yi Hung to discover. This hidden collection wasn't just makeup, it was the physical evidence of her calculated deception, a testament to her foresight and planning. For Chen, this transformation represented more than mere physical change. Each product removed from her face was an act of reclamation, a step toward embodying her authentic self. After years of strategic self-erasure, the psychology of physical transformation runs deep. It's not simply about appearance, but about identity and power. Chen hadn't just hidden her beauty. She had temporarily surrendered a part of herself to achieve a greater purpose. She applied moisturizer to her freshly cleansed skin, the gentle motion almost ceremonial. The woman emerging in the mirror was a stranger to Yihang, but intimately familiar to Chen herself. This was the face she'd hidden away for 3 years, sacrificed for her research and observation. Now it would serve as the instrument of her revelation. With expert precision, Chen began applying her makeup, not to hide flaws, but to enhance her natural beauty. Her fingers moved with the confidence of a professional, blending and shading with practiced ease. Each stroke of the brush was deliberate, creating definition where she had previously created dullness. The transformation continued as she applied a subtle highlight to her cheekbones, drawing attention to her bone structure in ways she'd spent years downplaying. Chen's eyes, which she'd made appear smaller and unremarkable through carefully applied matte shadows, now widened with precisely placed shimmer and liner. The woman in the mirror became more striking with each passing minute. Her lips, which she'd kept pale and thin-looking, now gleamed with rich color that enhanced their natural fullness. She walked to her closet and pushed aside the row of deliberately plain, oversized clothes that had been her uniform for 3 years. Behind them hung a garment bag she'd placed there 3 months earlier. Chen Yan zipped it with reverence, revealing the red dress she'd purchased in secret, a dress designed not to hide but to announce her presence to the world. The silk fabric slipped over her skin like water, clinging to curves she'd concealed beneath shapeless garments. The vibrant red color stood in stark contrast to the muted grays and browns Yihang was accustomed to seeing her wear. This wasn't just a dress, it was a declaration. Chen moved to the bedroom and knelt before the bed, reaching underneath to retrieve a small safe. Her fingers spun the combination with practiced ease. Inside lay 2 objects, the manuscript for her newest novel, and an invitation identical to the one Yihang had received weeks earlier, addressed not to Chen, but to author Nuya. She traced her fingers over the embossed lettering of the invitation, a small smile playing at her lips. For 3 years, she had lived a double life of extraordinary complexity. Each morning she transformed herself into the plain, unremarkable wife Yihang believed he had married. Each day, she observed and documented the cruelty and superficiality of his world, and each night, when alone, she poured those observations into novels that captivated the very people who dismissed the methodical nature of Chen's transformation, revealed skills deliberately concealed from her husband. Her understanding of makeup techniques went far beyond casual knowledge. She had learned to manipulate her appearance with professional precision, using cosmetics not just to enhance features, but to strategically alter how she was perceived. This deliberate manipulation of her image had allowed her to move through Yihang's world unnoticed, gathering material while remaining invisible. Chen stepped back to assess her complete transformation in the full-length mirror. The woman reflected back bore no resemblance to the one Yihang had belittled for years. Her hair framed her face in elegant waves. Her makeup enhanced features that had been deliberately dulled. The red dress accentuated a figure Yihang had never truly seen, but the most striking difference was in her eyes. No longer downcast and meek, they now held the confident gaze of a woman fully in command of her narrative. She slipped on heels that added inches to her typically hunched stature. The physical elevation seemed symbolic of the reclamation of power taking place. Chen was not just changing her appearance, she was shedding a persona that had served its purpose and stepping into her true identity. Perfect timing, she murmured, checking her watch. The gala would be well underway. Yihang would be positioned near the entrance, eagerly scanning the crowd for his literary idol. The thought brought a smile to Chen's lips, not the meek expression Yihang knew, but one of anticipation and carefully orchestrated vindication. Chen gathered her manuscript and invitation, placing them in an elegant clutch. She had one final task before leaving. She walked to Yihang's study and placed an envelope on his desk. Inside were the divorce papers he'd mentioned, already signed. But she had added something else, the dedication page from her newest novel. She wouldn't need to wait for him to serve the papers. She was already free. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she had memorized months ago. "The car service, please." "Yes, for Thor Muya." The words felt powerful on her tongue after years of silence. "To the National Literary Excellence Gala." The woman in red arrived like a revelation, each step across the marble floor of the Grand Literary Hall, creating ripples of silence in her wake. Unlike the calculated silence that follows a deliberate spectacle, this was the organic hush of genuine awe. Conversation suspended mid-sentence, champagne flutes paused halfway to lips, bodies instinctively shifting to clear her path. The red dress wasn't merely clothing but a declaration, its vibrant hue cutting through the sea of conventional black tuxedos and safe, muted evening wear. Yi Hung stood near the entrance, his posture betraying his anticipation. For weeks, he had positioned himself strategically within the literary community, ensuring his invitation to this exclusive gathering, where rumors suggested the elusive Muya might finally show her face. He scanned each new arrival with the hungry eyes of a collector, seeking the final piece to complete his prize set. When the woman in red entered, his gaze traveled over her, appreciatively, a reflexive response to beauty, before continuing his search, utterly blind to what stood before him. "Who is she?" someone whispered nearby, the question spreading through the room like a current. Yi Hung glanced back, following the collective gaze to better assess what had captivated everyone's attention. The woman stood with perfect posture, her features arranged in an expression of serene confidence. Something about her struck him as vaguely familiar, but he dismissed the thought immediately. He would certainly remember meeting someone so. The sea of black-tied attendees parted as she moved deeper into the room. Not a single hand extended to stop her. Not a single staff member approached to check her invitation. Instead, the event coordinator, who had earlier treated even Yi Hung with professional detachment, now hurried forward with uncharacteristic eagerness, bowing slightly as she greeted the woman in red. "It's an honor," the coordinator said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "We've prepared everything according to your specifications." Yi Hang frowned, watching as the woman was escorted past the velvet rope that separated the general attendees from the VIP section. His own status had earned him access to that exclusive area, but he had been planning to wait by the entrance a while longer, hoping to witness Mia's arrival. Now curiosity compelled him to abandon his post. He moved through the crowd toward the restricted area, noticing how others were doing the same, drawn by the mystery unfolding before them. Red has always been the color of power and transformation. Psychologically, it triggers immediate attention, signaling importance and commanding respect. Throughout history, it has represented everything from royalty to revolution, from passion to rebirth. Tonight, it transformed a room full of literary elites into eager spectators in a drama they didn't yet understand. The woman wearing it seemed perfectly aware of this effect, carrying herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had calculated every element of her appearance. As Yi Hung made his way toward the VIP section, he noticed something peculiar. Several prominent publishers and literary agents were gravitating toward the woman, their expressions showing a strange mixture of reverence and excitement. These were people who, by virtue of their positions, maintained careful composure in all professional settings. Yet now they approached her like devotees, each waiting for a moment of acknowledgement. "Is it really her?" The whisper reached Yi Hang from somewhere to his left. "Muya." His head snapped toward the source, a senior editor from one of the country's most prestigious publishing houses. The man was speaking to his colleague, both of them watching the woman in red with undisguised fascination. "It must be," the colleague replied. "Look how they're treating her." Yi Hung felt a strange sensation in his chest, excitement mingled with confusion. Could this really be happening? After years of admiring her work from afar, could he finally be in the same room as the brilliant mind behind those novels? He pushed forward more insistently now, no longer concerned with appearing composed. Around him, the whispers multiplied, confirmation spreading through the room that the mysterious Muya had indeed arrived, and she had chosen to make her entrance in spectacular fashion. The event organizers were now escorting her toward the stage at the far end of the hall. Yihang followed, elbowing his way through the crowd with uncharacteristic rudeness. He had to get closer. He had to see her clearly. After years of imagining the woman behind those profound insights into human nature, he needed to confirm if reality matched his carefully constructed fantasy. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host's voice boomed through the speakers as he took to the stage, "we have a truly special honor tonight." The crowd fell completely silent. Hundreds of faces turned expectantly toward the stage. Yihang finally secured a position near the front, his breath shallow with anticipation. The woman in red stood just off stage, partially visible to him from his vantage point. "For 3 years, her words have moved us, challenged us, and revealed truths about ourselves we perhaps preferred not to see," the host continued. "Tonight, for the first time, she has chosen to step from behind the curtain of anonymity." Yihang leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of a nearby table. Something about the woman's profile stirred that same sense of recognition he had felt earlier, but the connection remained elusive, dancing just beyond his grasp. "Please welcome the remarkable author, Muya," the host announced, with theatrical flourish. The woman stepped into the spotlight, her red dress catching the light like liquid fire. The room erupted in applause, all except for one man, frozen in place as if struck by lightning. Yihang's hands forgot to move, his lungs forgot to breathe. For the first time, he saw her face clearly, illuminated by the stage lights, and the world around him seemed to collapse. The woman standing before the adoring crowd was Chen, his Chen, the woman he had dismissed as plain and unworthy, the woman whose divorce papers waited in his desk drawer, the woman he had never truly seen until this moment. His expression transformed in stages. First confusion, as if his eyes were playing tricks, then disbelief, as he rejected the evidence before him. Finally, dawning horror, as the full implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had slept beside literary brilliance for 3 years. He had belittled and humiliated the very woman whose words he had claimed to revere above all others. Chen's eyes swept across the audience, momentarily meeting Yihang's stunned gaze without a flicker of acknowledgement. She might have been looking at a stranger. The crowd continued applauding, unaware of the private catastrophe unfolding in their midst, as Yihang's carefully constructed world crumbled around him. Conversations resumed in excited whispers. "She's even more striking than I imagined," said one woman nearby. "No wonder she kept her identity secret. The mystery only enhanced her work's impact," replied her companion. Yihang heard these comments as if from underwater, distorted and distant. His focus remained fixed on Chen, trying desperately to reconcile the woman on stage with the wife he thought he knew. The event organizers were treating her with extreme deference, approaching her with the careful respect usually reserved for revered elders or royalty. Publishers who had barely acknowledged Yihang's presence earlier now hovered nearby, hoping for just a moment of her attention. The stark contrast between their treatment of Chen and how Yihang had treated her for years created a painful cognitive dissonance that left him paralyzed. As Chen prepared to begin her acceptance speech, Yihang noticed something that struck him with particular force. Her posture, her expressions, her entire presence radiated a quiet confidence that had always been there, hidden beneath the submissive demeanor he had mistaken for weakness. Had he ever truly looked at her? Had he ever made the slightest effort to see beyond the carefully constructed facade she presented? That quiet confidence transformed into absolute command as Chen approached the microphone, silence descending over the room like a weighted blanket. For 3 years, she had been gathering material for her masterpiece, living inside her own novel as both author and character, with Yihang never suspecting he was merely a study in human arrogance. As her fingers touched the cool metal of the microphone, Chen looked out at the sea of expectant faces. These literary elites, who had spent years speculating about her identity, now leaned forward in their seats, hanging on the precipice of her first public utterance as author Muya. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. The woman who had been silenced at dinner tables was now commanding the rapt attention of hundreds. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear and melodious, carrying to every corner of the grand literary hall, without effort. "They say the best stories come from what we observe, not what we imagine." Ye Hung froze in his seat. The voice, he knew that voice, but it couldn't be. He had heard Chen speak thousands of times, yet never with this authority, this musical cadence that now held the room spellbound. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful, like two separate realities colliding in his mind. He watched as his wife, the woman he had introduced as household staff, the woman his mother had mocked openly, commanded the room with the ease of someone born to it. "My work explores invisibility," Chen continued, her hands moving gracefully to emphasize her points. "Not literal invisibility, but the kind society imposes on those deemed unworthy of attention. We walk past people every day without truly seeing them. We make assumptions based on appearances that blind us to the depth beneath." The audience nodded, captivated not just by her words, but by the magnetism of her delivery. Research has shown that confident public speaking fundamentally alters how listeners perceive both the intelligence and physical attractiveness of the speaker. The authority in Chen's voice, the precise gestures of her hands, the measured pace of her delivery, all combined to create an aura of brilliance that was impossible to ignore. "My latest novel examines what happens when we deliberately make ourselves invisible as a form of protection or study," she continued, a slight smile playing at her lips. "My protagonist chose to hide in plain sight, to become the person others expected, unremarkable, easily dismissed. This allowed her to observe the true nature of those around her when they believed no one of consequence was watching." In the third row, Yi Hung's business partner blanched, suddenly remembering his casual remark about Chen being refreshingly unsophisticated. 2 seats down, the marketing director, who had once loudly wondered if Chen even understood the wine she was serving, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Recognition was dawning, connections forming as Chen's words illuminated the past 3 years in a harsh new light. "For research purposes," Chen said, her voice taking on a scholarly tone, "I immersed myself in environments where judgments based on appearance were particularly prevalent. I documented reactions, categorized behaviors, and analyzed patterns that emerged when someone deemed ordinary entered spaces designed for those who consider themselves extraordinary." Yi Hung's mother, sitting rigidly in her reserved seat near the front, clutched her evening bag with white knuckles. Just last month, she had questioned her son's choice of wife, while Chen silently served dessert. Now, watching the celebrated genius whose books adorned her own coffee table, Madame Lin's face drained of color, as understanding struck her with the force of physical impact. As Chen spoke about her writing process, she moved effortlessly between literary analysis and personal anecdotes, demonstrating not just her brilliance, but her humanity. The audience laughed at her subtle humor, nodded at her insights, and occasionally gasped at particularly piercing observations about societal hierarchies. The transformation was complete. No longer the meek wife, Chen now embodied everything Yi had claimed to value: intelligence, eloquences, depth of character. "The moment when my protagonist realizes her worth is not determined by others' perception of her appearance," became the emotional core of the novel, Chen explained, her voice growing softer, drawing the audience even further into her confidence. "There is a particular kind of power in being underestimated, in knowing your true value, while others fail to see it." Yi Hung felt each word like a blow. He recognized phrases from the books he had studied so carefully, passages he had highlighted and discussed at length with colleagues. But now those words carried new weight, new context. Every praise he had lavished on Muya's insight into human nature now reflected back on him, illuminating his own blindness with merciless clarity. "I'd like to conclude by expressing gratitude to my primary research subject," Chen said, her tone shifting subtly to something both harder and more vulnerable. "A man whose commitment to superficial values provided me with such rich material that I completed not one but 6 novels during our association. His unwavering confidence in his own judgment, despite all evidence to the contrary, became the foundation for my most complex antagonist." A ripple of whispers spread through the audience as understanding dawned. This wasn't just an acceptance speech. It was a revelation, a public unmasking of not just Muya's identity, but of a social experiment conducted in real time. Then came the moment that would replay in Yi Heng's nightmares for years to come. Chen's eyes, those eyes he had never truly looked into, scanned the crowd with deliberate precision until they found him. For 3 excruciatingly long seconds, she held his gaze, her expression neither angry nor triumphant, but acknowledging. Then she offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod, the kind one might give to a useful but ultimately disposable research tool. The audience erupted in thunderous applause as Chen stepped back from the microphone with grace and poise. The standing ovation continued as she accepted her award, the crystal trophy catching the light as she raised it in appreciation. Not once did she look in Yi Heng's direction again. As the applause finally subsided and Chen stepped down from the stage, Yi Heng pushed his way through the crowd, desperate to reach her. But the woman who had been invisible at his side for 3 years was now the center of gravity in the room. Literary critics, publishers, fellow authors, all converged around her, creating an impenetrable barrier of admirers. "Mia, your analysis of power dynamics and relationships is revolutionary," gushed a renowned literature professor, positioning himself directly in Yi Heng's path. "Your character development puts you in the company of the greatest writers of our generation," declared another, effortlessly blocking Yi Heng's attempt to slip between 2 publishing executives. Yi Heng watched helplessly as Chen engaged with each person, graciously accepting compliments and answering questions with thoughtful precision. She moved through the crowd with natural ease, as if she had always belonged in this world of intellectual exchange and mutual respect. The woman who had stood silently behind him at countless functions now held court with the cultural elite, while he remained on the periphery, unable to penetrate the circle of her newfound admirer. Yi Heng stood frozen at the edge of the circle surrounding Chen, a man suddenly invisible in a room where he had always commanded attention. The tables had turned with devastating finality as he pushed against the current of admirers surrounding the woman he had once deemed unworthy of being seen beside him. The crowd parted momentarily, giving him a clear view of Chen Qiagrua, her elegant posture, her animated expressions, as she discussed literary theory with a renowned critic. This wasn't the meek and silent woman who had moved through their home like a shadow. This was Otomue Otokankia, brilliant and completely beyond his reach. He lunged forward when a small gap appeared between 2 publishing executives, only to have it close immediately as a literary agent stepped into the space. Eager to discuss adaptation rights with Chen, Yi Heng's carefully cultivated business smile had dissolved into an expression of naked desperation. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, a humiliating dance as he orbited the periphery of her now famed fame. "Excuse me," he muttered, attempting to squeeze between 2 university professors deep in conversation with Chen about her narrative techniques. They merely shifted their shoulders, creating an impenetrable wall. No one recognized him as Chen's husband, or perhaps, more painfully, no one cared. The CEO, who had built his empire on commanding rooms, now couldn't even enter one. "Her dissection of power dynamics in relationships is absolutely revolutionary," a woman in a midnight blue gown was saying, her voice carrying over the crowd. "The way she portrays the gradual erosion of self-worth under constant criticism, it's devastatingly accurate." Yi Heng felt a cold sweat break across his forehead as he recognized his own tactics described with clinical precision. Each morning at breakfast, each dismissive gesture, each correction of her appearance. All of it laid bare in literary form for the world to dissect and condemn. The narcissistic husband in Invisible Reflections is brilliant characterization, another voice added. The way he only sees value in others as extensions of himself. I've never read such an authentic portrayal of entitlement. Yi Hung's breath caught in his throat. He had read that novel, praised it effusively to colleagues without recognizing himself in its pages. Now the realization crashed over him like ice water. He had been applauding his own damnation, blind to the mirror Chen had been holding up to his behavior all along. A waiter brushed past, momentarily creating a narrow path toward Chen. Yi Hang seized the opportunity, moving with the desperate agility of a drowning man spotting a lifeline. For a brief moment, he stood just feet away from her, close enough to see the delicate earrings catching the light as she tilted her head to listen to an elderly poet's question. The villain in your latest work, the poet was saying, seems to lack self-awareness until the very end. Was that intentional? That moment of horrifying recognition when he finally sees himself through his victim's eyes. Chen smiled, a gentle curve of lips that held no malice despite the subject matter. I believe that's the most painful moment possible for someone who has constructed their entire identity around superiority. To suddenly see yourself as the monster in someone else's story. There's no greater catalyst for either transformation or complete denial. Yi Hang felt physically ill, her words piercing through layers of denial he hadn't even realized he'd built. In his pocket, the divorce papers suddenly felt like a burning brand against his thigh. The document he had prepared as his ticket to freedom now represented the ultimate symbol of his blindness and loss. The crowd shifted again, and suddenly, Yi Hang found himself face to face with Chen. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, he searched for some hint of the woman who had shared his home, some flicker of familiarity or acknowledgement. But Chen's gaze held only the polite interest one might offer a stranger who had accidentally stepped into one's path. "Chen," he said, her name emerging as a choked whisper. She blinked once, her expression unchanging, except for the slightest tightening around her eyes. "Yi Hang," she acknowledged with a small nod, as if greeting a distant acquaintance at a business function. "I need to talk to you," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Please, just 5 minutes." Around them, the crowd continued their conversations, but Yi Hang could feel curious glances sliding their way. The perfect composure Chen had maintained all evening showed not even a hairline crack, as she regarded him with detached civility. "I'm afraid I'm quite busy at the moment," she said, her voice neither cold nor warm, simply matter-of-fact. "Perhaps another time would be more appropriate." Yi Hang reached for her arm, but stopped himself, suddenly aware of how the gesture might appear to onlookers. "Chen, I had no idea I was Muya," she finished for him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Or that I had value beyond what you could see. Which revelation is troubling you more, I wonder?" Before he could answer, a distinguished woman in her 60s approached, hand extended toward Chen. "Miet Patricia Dawson from Meridian Publishing. We've been hoping to speak with you about your next project." Chen turned to the publisher with genuine warmth, a smile Yi Hang had never witnessed during their marriage transforming her face. "Ms. Dawson, it's a pleasure. I've admired your literary imprint for years." As Chen began to step away with the publisher, Yi Hang moved forward with the recklessness of a man with nothing left to lose. "The divorce papers," he blurted out, low enough that only Chen could hear. I never meant." Chen paused, turning back to him with an expression that contained neither triumph nor anger, only a profound and final distance. "I've already signed them," she said simply. "They're on your desk at home, along with the dedication page for my newest manuscript. I thought you might appreciate the irony." The publisher was waiting patiently, pretending not to overhear this exchange. Chen turned to her with professional grace. "Shall we find somewhere quieter to talk, Ms. Dawson? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the current market for literary fiction." Yi Hong stood rooted to the spot as Chen walked away, the red dress that had first caught his attention now becoming a symbol of all he had failed to see and appreciate. Around him the gala continued, laughter and conversation flowing, while he remained stranded in a moment of devastating clarity. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the folded divorce papers he had brought as a final gesture of dismissal. Now they represented something entirely different, the consequences of his profound failure to recognize the extraordinary woman who had lived beneath his roof for 3 years, the woman he had wounded daily with casual cruelty, while obsessively pursuing the very identity she had kept hidden from him. A bitter laugh escaped him as he realized the perfect symmetry of Chen's revenge, not in humiliating him publicly or exposing his behavior, but simply in allowing him to finally see her true worth at the exact moment she was walking away forever. The punishment was not in what she had done, but in what he now understood he had lost. The dedication page trembled in Yi Hong's hand as he stood in the cool night air of the balcony, the muffled sounds of applause and conversation from the gala creating a stark backdrop to this private confrontation. Chen had granted him 5 minutes, not out of love or lingering attachment, but with the clinical detachment of a long experiment. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the wife he thought he knew. Her posture, her gaze, even the cadence of her speech, belonged to a stranger who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. "Please," Yi Hong began, his voice catching. "I didn't know. I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Give me another chance. I love you." The words tumbled out with desperate sincerity, his eyes taking in the transformation that wasn't really a transformation at all, but simply the unveiling of what had always existed beneath the carefully constructed facade. Chen's laugh was soft but without warmth. "Love? You don't even know me, Yi Hong. The woman you claim to love tonight is the same one you couldn't bear to look at yesterday." She moved to the balcony railing, putting deliberate distance between them. "Our marriage was never about love. It was a controlled study of human behavior. Specifically, the behavior of a man who values appearance above character." Yi Hong's expression crumpled as the full weight of her words settled on him. "A study? You married me as an experiment?" "I'm a writer," Chen replied simply. "I create characters by understanding people. 3 years ago, I developed a research proposal examining how elite circles construct value systems based entirely on surface attributes. I needed to document these behaviors from within, not as an outsider." Her voice remained measured, as if explaining a business transaction. "You were the perfect subject, successful, appearance-obsessed, and so convinced of your own worth that you never questioned why a published author would agree to marry you without a prenuptial agreement." The revelation hit Yi Hong like physical blows. The marriage he had treated as an inconvenience, the woman he had dismissed and humiliated, all had been carefully orchestrated by Chen herself. She hadn't been the victim of his cruelty. She had been its curator, collecting every slight and dismissal with scientific precision. "Before our first meeting, I consulted with a theatrical makeup artist who specialized in subtle character transformations," Chen continued, her clinical tone making the deception even more devastating. "We developed techniques to create artificial imperfections, slightly uneven skin tone, methods to make my hair appear lifeless, even posture adjustments to seem less confident. Nothing dramatically unattractive, just enough to be deemed ordinary by someone with your particular standard." Yi Hong recalled their first meeting at a literary fundraiser, how he had barely noticed her until she mentioned her family's small bookstore. He had found her knowledge of literature intriguing enough to pursue a second meeting, but always with a sense that he was settling, that he deserved someone whose external beauty matched his status. The irony crushed him now, as he faced the artifice of his own superficial value. "Each day, I documented your reactions," Chen said, her voice now taking on the quality of a university lecturer. "Your disgust when I wore certain colors, your impatience when I spoke in public, the subtle ways you positioned yourself away from me in photographs, your mother's comments that you never contradicted. the systematic exclusion from your professional life. She listed these offenses without emotion, as if reading items from a grocery list. Every incident became data points in my analysis of how physical appearance determines human worth in certain social strata. Yi Hung felt physically ill as he recognized the academic detachment in her voice, the same tone he had admired in Muya's writing. Was any of it real? He managed to ask. That's the fascinating question that drove my research, Chen replied. What is real in a relationship based entirely on appearances? When you marry someone for how they look, rather than who they are, which person bears responsibility for the deception? She gestured between them. I presented an artificial exterior, yes, but you never looked beyond it, never questioned why a woman with my educational background and intellect would accept your treatment without protest. The methodical nature of Chen's experiment reminded Yi Hung of famous psychological studies he had read about, experiments where researchers altered their identities to observe human behavior in controlled environments. But none had lasted 3 years, none had involved marriage. The ethical boundaries seemed blurred, yet he could hardly claim moral high ground after his own treatment of her. The manuscript you saw me working on is my culmination of this research, Chen explained. It examines how prejudice based on appearance influences perspective of intelligence, worth, and capability. Your reactions provided the emotional spine of the narrative. How systematic dismissal erodes identity. How cruelty becomes casual when directed at someone deemed unworthy of respect. Yi Hung's mind raced through memories of their marriage with newfound context. The quiet acceptance he had interpreted as weakness with calculated observation. The journals he had dismissed as feminine hobbies were rigorous research notes. The woman he had pitied was studying him like a specimen, recording his every failure of character. Go through with the divorce now? He asked, grasping for anything that might give him leverage. If this was all research, why not continue? Chen's expression shifted slightly, the first genuine emotion she had shown during their conversation. Because I have everything I need. The research phase is complete. The book is written. My editor is expecting the final manuscript next week. She glanced at her watch. And frankly, living with someone who views you as fundamentally inferior becomes tiresome, even when it's by design. Yi Hung noticed for the first time that she was holding something, the divorce papers he had left on his desk, already bearing her signature. She extended them toward him with elegant fingers that had never truly belonged to the clumsy woman he thought he had married. I've had enough of you, Chen stated simply, echoing words from an earlier confrontation, but now infused with quiet authority rather than resignation. As Yi Hung took the papers, he noticed additional pages attached, the dedication page of her forthcoming novel. To his horror, it read, "To my research subject, who taught me that the worst kind of blindness is not the inability to see beauty, but the refusal to see humanity." The words struck with devastating precision. It wasn't her beauty he had failed to recognize, though that was painfully obvious now. It was her personhood, her intelligence, her worth beyond decorative value. In creating a controlled experiment about superficial values, Chen had revealed the emptiness at his core. Your fatal flaw wasn't failing to see my beauty, Yi Hung, Chen said quietly. It was failing to see my humanity. That makes you a fascinating character study, but a terrible husband. She turned toward the door leading back to the gala. Your 5 minutes are up. I have a publisher waiting to discuss my next project. Chen disappeared into the glittering crowd that night, leaving behind a man who had only ever seen a fraction of who she truly was. Within days, her identity revelation sent shockwaves through literary circles, transforming a woman once dismissed as nobody into the most talked-about author in the country. The morning after the gala, headlines blared across digital and print media. Literary mystery solved. Lewis Crosser, the monster meter, masks herself in stunning. Accompanying photos captured Chen in her magnificent red dress, head held high, a stark contrast to the downcast gaze she had maintained throughout her marriage. Yi Hung woke to his phone buzzing incessantly with notifications. Friends, business associates, and even his mother bombarded him with questions about the woman they had all dismissed and humiliated. The society pages that once featured him as a powerful business leader now positioned him as an unwitting character in a real-life drama. One prominent literary magazine published an analysis of Chen's latest novel, highlighting passages that mirrored her experiences. The protagonist's husband, with his practiced disdain and performative superiority, creates a cage of judgment around his wife, never realizing she holds the key to her own liberation. Readers immediately connected these words to Yi Hung's public image crumbled with each new article. At his office, Yi Hung found himself the subject of sidelong glances and hushed conversations that ceased the moment he entered a room. The man who once commanded respect through fear and intimidation now inspired only pity and schadenfreude. His executive assistant quietly removed the latest issue of Business Weekly from his desk. The cover featured Chen accepting her literary award, while the sidebar noted her connection to CEO Yi Han, who reportedly inspired the narcissistic antagonist in her best-selling novel. Meanwhile, Chen navigated her newfound visibility with remarkable poise. At her first post-revelation interview with Literary Quarterly, she neither confirmed nor denied the autobiographical elements in her work. "Every writer draws from life experience," she said, "but fiction allows us to explore universal truths through invented circumstances." When pressed about her marriage, she simply stated, "My personal journey informed my understanding of how people construct value systems based on appearance, but my books speak for themselves." This graceful deflection only increased public fascination with her story. Yi Hang's attempts at reconciliation began with expensive flower arrangements delivered to Chen's new apartment, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking the city's arts district, far from the cold penthouse they had shared. The flowers were returned untouched. His public apology, published as a full-page advertisement in the city's most prestigious newspaper, went unacknowledged. "I failed to see the extraordinary woman before me," the statement read, "and I am living with the consequences of my blindness." Critics dismissed it as a transparent effort to salvage his reputation, rather than a genuine expression of remorse. His increasingly desperate text messages accumulated in Chen's phone, unread and unanswered. He waited outside publishing houses where she was rumored to have meetings, only to watch her emerge in conversation with editors and literary agents, who treated her with the respect he had never shown. The woman who once dressed in deliberately muted colors now appeared in vibrant blues, rich purples, and occasional returns to the powerful red that had marked her emergence. Her clothing wasn't merely fashionable. It was an authentic expression of a personality Yi Hang had never bothered to discover. Every public appearance revealed another facet of Chen that Yi Hang had overlooked or dismissed. At a panel discussion on character development, her insightful analysis and quick wit drew appreciative laughter from the audience. During a charity auction for literacy programs, her generous bid on a first edition revealed both her knowledge of rare books and her connection to her. She moved through these spaces with natural confidence, no longer the shadow that knew its place, but a woman fully inhabiting her power. Alone in the penthouse that now felt cavernous and empty, Yi Hang finally opened Chen's latest novel. He had purchased it the day after the gala, but had avoided reading it, afraid of what he might find within its pages. For 3 days he barely left his bedroom, emerging only for necessities as he consumed every word. The protagonist's husband in the novel wasn't a simplistic villain, but a complex character whose upbringing and social pressures had shaped his superficial value system. Yi Hang recognized himself in the character's casual cruelty, in his unexamined assumptions about worth and beauty, and in his tragic inability to recognize the extraordinary mind behind the face he had deemed unworthy. The novel's final chapters devastated him. The fictional husband experienced a moment of revelation too late to salvage what he had carelessly discarded. Yi Hang wept, not for the character, but for himself, for 3 years of missed opportunities to know the brilliant woman who had shared his home. He understood now that Chen's experiment hadn't been merely academic research, but a profound exploration of human behavior and the damage caused by appearance-based prejudice. 6 weeks after the gala, a bookstore near Nirya's office announced that author Muya would be signing copies of her complete collection. Yi Hung joined the line that stretched around the block, clutching his well-worn copy of her latest novel. As the line inched forward, he rehearsed what he might say when he finally faced her. Would he apologize again? Ask for another chance? Beg her to at least acknowledge his existence? 4 hours later, he stood before the signing table, looking down at the woman he had married, but never truly seen. Chen glanced up, her expression revealing nothing, as their eyes met for the first time since that night on the balcony. No recognition, no anger, no pity. Just the polite attention she might give any reader. The bookstore fell silent as staff and patrons recognized the infamous husband. Yi Hang placed his copy on the table, his hands trembling slightly. Without a word, Chen opened to the dedication page and signed her name with fluid confidence. She closed the book and handed it back, already looking past him to the next person in line. It wasn't until he stepped outside that Yi Hung opened the book to read what she had written. Below her signature were the words Chen had chosen as her final communication to him. Some people are worth more than their appearance suggests. All people deserve to be valued, regardless. Simple words that carried the weight of everything he had failed to understand during their marriage. Not a condemnation or a plea, but a lesson. 6 months after the gala revelation, Chen's story transcended personal vindication to become a cultural touchstone. Her message resonated far beyond literary circles, challenging society's obsession with appearances that diminished human worth. This experiment wasn't designed to punish one man, Chen explained during her first television interview, her voice steady and assured. It was about exposing how we devalue people based on superficial judgments, denying their humanity in the process. The red dress hung in Chen's closet, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that true beauty emanates from within, from character, intelligence, and kindness. Meanwhile, Yi Hang kept her signed novel by his bed, a permanent testament to the extraordinary woman who had always been there.